There was never a clean beginning, only aftermath. When the blood dried and the screams stopped echoing through broken hives, a new breed of warrior emerged from the shadow of annihilation, worse than their progenitors, crueler than their enemies, and terrifying even to their kin. The flesh-tearers were born not with ceremony or celebration, but with suspicion, necessity, and the stench of war still clinging to their armor. To understand them, we must begin not with their creation, but with the wound that birthed them. The Horus heresy had shattered everything. 10,000 years ago, the Imperium bled from 1,000,000 cuts. Its greatest sons had turned against each other, and the Emperor of mankind, he who had unified terror and set humanity on its course through the stars, was left broken upon his golden throne. From the fires of that civil war, the Legions Astartes were shattered, their brotherhood dissolved by decree, their names erased or rewritten. The Blood Angels, under the angelic Sanguinius, had been among the noblest of all the legions. Their gene seed was pure in vision, if not in result. They were artists of war, warriors sculpted from glory, tragedy, and restraint. But the death of Sanguinius at the hands of the arch-traitor Horus during the Siege of Terra cursed his sons forever. In that moment, something inside them fractured. Grief calcified into hunger. Their memories, encoded in flesh, became nightmares made real. From this spiritual ruin came the second founding. Robout Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and architect of the Codex Astartes, initiated the reorganization of the remaining Space Marine legions. Each legion was broken into chapters, no larger than 1,000 warriors. It was an attempt to prevent another Horus. But for the Blood Angels, the damage was deeper than structure. The flaw was inside them. And with every generation of gene seed replication, it grew worse. Among the chapters created from the Blood Angels' gene line was one that quickly drew wary glances: the Flesh-Tearers. Their name wasn't just chosen, it was earned. Official records place the founding of the Flesh-Tearers in 31M, shortly after the conclusion of the Horus heresy, and during the early implementation of Guilliman's reforms. They were part of the first wave of successor chapters drawn from Sanguinius's line. But even from their inception, the Flesh-Tearers were not like their cousins. Their first chapter master, Nasir Amit, had earned the title the Flesh-Tearer during the heresy itself, a brutal warrior even among the Blood Angels, known for his barely contained fury and ruthless efficiency. Some accounts describe him as Sanguinius's dark mirror, where the Primarch wielded grace, Amit brought thunder. Where Sanguinius wept for the Emperor's dream, Amit bled for its survival. When the second founding scattered the sons of Sanguinius across the stars, Amit's destiny crystallized. He would take those like him, those most racked by the twin curses of the gene flaw, and forge them into something that could still serve the Emperor. A blade too jagged for display, but sharp enough to cut through the dark. Their first recruitment world was not Cretacia. That came later. Initially, the Flesh-Tearers drew their warriors from worlds once held by the Blood Angels, scattered and battered remnants of their broken empire. These early recruits were volatile, impulsive, barely restrained by discipline or tradition. The gene flaw, the infamous black rage and red thirst, manifested in them more fiercely than in any other successor. It was as if Amit had gathered the broken fragments of his legion's soul and forced them into coherence by sheer force of will. From the beginning, the Adeptus Terra monitored them with concern. Codex compliance was not the Flesh-Tearers' strength. They followed the rough outline, yes, and outwardly conformed to Guilliman's edicts. But Amit's doctrine was not one of defense or surgical strike. His warriors were unleashed. Wars became slaughters. Victories were painted in gore. There are stories, buried in inquisitorial vaults, of imperial governors requesting Flesh-Tearers' aid, only to find their cities turned into charnel houses once the threat was gone. No enemy left breathing, no civilian left to thank them. Still, they were effective. The Flesh-Tearers earned distinction in the Scouring, hunting down traitor remnants across a fractured galaxy. They fought at the edge of extinction, often deployed in the most hopeless theatres, the most brutal sieges, the most intractable quagmires, and they won, again and again, at a terrible cost. Amit understood that his chapter's existence was conditional. They were tolerated, not trusted. He knew their survival depended not on purity, but on usefulness. So he kept them active. Constant war was their leash. The red thirst, that eternal craving for blood and death, was a tide that could only be turned by drowning in it. For centuries, they persisted in this way, half myth, half threat. When Amit finally died, how exactly is lost to time, though some say he willingly walked into death before he lost himself entirely, the chapter fractured further. Leadership passed to a succession of brutal commanders, some more stable than others. None had Amit's raw charisma. None could control the bloodlust. Campaigns became more frenzied. In a few horrific instances, entire planetary populations vanished under their protection. The Imperium whispered of censure. There were quiet calls to disband the chapter. The Inquisition investigated. The Blood Angels turned their gaze away. But the galaxy was too vast, the threats too many, the enemies too relentless, and the flesh-tearers, they still won. By M36, the chapter had relocated to Cretacia, a death world wreathed in jungle, predators, and primordial ruin. It was not a home chosen for peace, but one that mirrored their essence. On Cretacia, only the brutal survived. The planet itself felt like an extension of their character, untamed, unrepentant, and soaked in the lifeblood of anything foolish enough to resist. Recruitment from Cretacia didn't tame the flesh-tearers, it sharpened them. The young aspirants were already killers before they ever tasted the gene seed. The rituals of initiation became mythic. Some of them involved trials against the planet itself. Others involved survival against each other. By the time they donned their red and black armor, they weren't merely warriors. They were weapons. The Ordo Hereticus continued to observe. Internal reports described the chapter as structurally compliant, spiritually suspect. Their fortress monastery held chapels defaced by claw marks. Their librarians, tormented by the madness of the warp, rarely survived more than a few decades. Chaplains wept blood during sermons. Battle brothers reported visions of Sanguinius devoured by flame. The flaw deepened. Worse still was the Black Rage. When a flesh-tearer succumbed to the madness, they didn't weep. They didn't hallucinate. They howled. They broke formation. They tore into friend and foe alike. Entire battle formations unraveled in seconds. It became common practice to keep Death Company units leashed until needed, to drop them from orbit in shock pods like live bombs of screaming memory. Other chapters, especially the more noble among the Adeptus Astartes, refused to fight alongside them. There are logs of Ultramarines commanders requesting flesh-tearer withdrawal mid-campaign, citing gross violation of Imperial protocol and the mass execution of unarmed non-combatants. The flesh-tearers responded with silence. They never apologized. They never explained. To them, war was not a diplomatic performance. It was a sacrament. Their rage wasn't a flaw to be hidden. It was a weapon to be wielded. And if the cost was horror, then so be it. Let the galaxy tremble. But even within this blood-drenched mythos, there were moments of clarity, brief flashes of introspection. Some flesh-tearers began keeping journals, painting murals with crushed pigments made from enemy bones. There are Vox recordings, banned and redacted, of battle brothers weeping after the carnage, begging to be put down before the thirst took them again. They knew what they were. They just couldn't stop it. As M41 loomed, the flesh-tearers stood at a precipice. Their numbers had dwindled. Their name was stained. They were barely more than a legend used to scare rebellious worlds into compliance. The Imperium had begun transferring their gene seed stocks to other, less volatile successors. Rumors swirled of final judgment. Then came Gabriel Seth, and the galaxy would bleed anew. It doesn't begin as madness. Not at first. It begins with a whisper, a breath drawn too deep before battle, a dream that doesn't belong to you, a memory of wings, Firelight, betrayal, the feeling that your hands are not your own, that you are standing in a place you have never been, and yet you know what comes next. You will kill your brother, and you will weep doing it. This is the curse, not metaphor, not legend. A real mutagenic flaw written into the gene code of the sons of Sanguinius. A twin affliction known by names that echo like death hymns across the Imperium, the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The Red Thirst is the more insidious of the two. It creeps. Those afflicted begin to feel a craving, not just for violence, but for the intimacy of it, to see the blood, to taste it. Battle becomes less duty and more desire. Restraint erodes. The body reacts on its own, faster, stronger, more savage, but the mind flickers in and out. There are accounts of flesh-tearers tearing open orc corpses to drink the steaming blood directly from their ruined necks. One apothecary's journal, seized by the Ordo Xenos and sealed under inquisitorial lock, describes a flesh-tearer who disemboweled a tyrannid warrior, then crushed its glands and inhaled the vapor for the sensation it gave him. To the outside eye, it is savagery. To the afflicted, it is necessity. But it's the black rage that turns hunger into prophecy. The black rage doesn't come slowly. It crashes. One moment, a warrior stands in formation, focused and ready. The next, he is screaming. Not words, memories, not his own. Through the corrupted echo of gene seed, the sons of Sanguinius relive their father's death. They become him. They are on the vengeful spirit. They see Horus, twisted and triumphant. They feel the agony of wings breaking, the betrayal of the War Master, the sorrow of failing to save the Emperor. They become locked in a death loop. Every flesh-tearer lives with the knowledge that one day his mind will not be his own, that he will kill those around him, seeing traitors where there are none, that he will cry out the name of Sanguinius in voices not his own, and be cast into the Death Company. And the Death Company is a mercy. It is the name given to those who have succumbed entirely. They are marked by black armor, sacred oils, and whispered rites. There is no cure, no hope. Only one path remains: to die in battle, preferably gloriously, and preferably far away from anyone who might be called civilian. The Blood Angels treat their Death Company with reverence and sorrow. They chant for them. They mourn them as if already dead. Entire canticles are dedicated to the remembrance of their fallen brothers. The flesh-tearers do not mourn, they weaponize. For them, the Death Company is not a symbol of loss. It is fury given form. They are launched at the enemy in drop pods or driven by Thunderhawk into the teeth of battle, a screaming mass of hallucination and butchery. It is not uncommon for a flesh-tearer's Death Company to turn on their own support forces once the enemy is routed. And so they are kept distant, like bombs with prayer scrolls strapped to the casing. What makes the affliction worse for the flesh-tearers is not just intensity, it's scale. The rate of gene flaw manifestation within the chapter is catastrophic. Records show up to 60% of some battle companies rendered unfit for deployment due to Black Rage episodes or Red Thirst psychosis. It is a death spiral. Every new initiate inherits a worse copy of the flaw, and the flesh-tearers have never had the infrastructure, the numbers, or the allies to slow it. They do not have the resources of the Blood Angels. Their apothecarian is overstretched. Their librarius nearly collapsed. Their gene seed is less preserved than barely contained. Entire samples have been destroyed because of warp taint contamination or uncontrolled mutations. At one point during M38, it was considered safer to incinerate whole recruit batches than risk implantation. And yet, they endure. This is not survivorship. It is refusal, a conscious, daily decision to become the knife that does not shatter, no matter how brittle the edge. The chaplains of the flesh-tearers, black-armored sentinels of doctrine and death, have developed their own rites to stave off the madness. They carry massive chainswords etched with individual kill counts, not as trophies, but as reminders. Some cover themselves in spikes, others bleed themselves ritually before battle. One is known to march into the wilds of Cretacia alone between campaigns, seeking visions or death. All of them speak in low, slow tones, as if louder words might wake something. But what truly defines the flesh-tearers' relationship to the curse is their philosophy of inevitability. They do not seek salvation. They do not pretend the flaw can be cured. They have seen their brethren fall, noble heroes, battle-proven commanders, entire squads lost to red fog dementia. They know that every day they resist is a day they steal from the floor. And when they fall in fire, screaming, hoping to take enough with them to make it matter. The chapter has debated this internally. Some voices, rare, often silenced, have argued for stasis, that perhaps the chapter should cease operations, entomb its gene seed, and end with dignity. Others believe in reform, accepting aid from the Adeptus Mechanicus, or seeking genetic correction from the Primaris gene seed. A few, mostly librarians, speculate that the Black Rage may not be a flaw at all, but a psychic echo, a warning, or a test from the Emperor himself. But such voices do not command squads. They do not hold the line on plague worlds. They do not tear through orc tide waves. They do not drag broken allies back from the edge while their own hearts scream for slaughter. And so the chapter marches on, not to redemption, but to use their curse like fire, to burn the enemies of mankind so brightly that their own fall is masked in smoke and glory. It is in this context that the arrival of the Indomitus Crusade and the Primaris initiative becomes so charged. When Robuta Guilliman returned to the Imperium, resurrected from stasis and filled with purpose, he brought with him a new generation of Astartes, the Primaris Marines. Engineered by Archmagos Belisarius Karl, using sealed designs from the Emperor's own vaults, these warriors were taller, stronger, faster, and crucially, free of many of the traditional flaws plaguing older gene lines. For most chapters, this was salvation. For the flesh-tearers, it was insult. Gabriel Seth, chapter master at the time of the Primaris integration, did not take the gift lightly. His words on the subject are recorded in a private communique with Lord Commander Dante, and have since been redacted by the Adeptus Administratum. But fragments remain. In one, he reportedly refers to the Primaris as empty meat, stretched too thin. In another, he questions why it took 10,000 years for the Emperor's will to suddenly require correction. He feared them, not as warriors, but as dilution, as death by purity. Seth's primary concern was that the integration of Primaris stock into the flesh-tearers would erase their identity, not cure it, that their rage, their terror, their fire would be sterilized. And while some of his command staff supported cautious integration, others whispered of sabotage, isolationism, or even secession. In the end, compromise won. Primaris were inducted, but they were changed. Those who survived flesh-tearers' induction rites, many did not, emerged different than their cousins. Something in the gene seed, or perhaps the rituals, or perhaps Cretacia itself tainted them. They began to dream. They began to rage. Over time, it became clear the flaw was stronger than design. The red thirst took them. The black rage came. Even purity could not protect against history encoded in blood. And so now, the flesh-tearers stand where they always have, at the edge of loyalty and lunacy. A chapter whose battle brothers wake in the night soaked in sweat and memory. Who kill not for glory, but to feed the thing inside them just long enough to make it to the next war. Who look at each other and wonder, who will break next? In some ways, the flesh-tearers are no longer just victims of a flaw. They are its evangelists. They have taken the curse and turned it into doctrine. Where others see horror, they see truth. That humanity is not saved by restraint, but by fury. That survival in the age of the Imperium requires more than obedience. It requires teeth. And if the day comes when the Imperium casts them down, calls them aberration or heresy, they will not run. They will not protest. They will answer, in blood. It always starts with the Vox screaming. Not orders, not warnings. Just static and blood and the unmistakable pitch of something wrong coming fast. When the flesh-tearers go to war, they do not arrive. They descend. Drop pods hit like meteors, scattering ferrocrete and flame across no man's land. Thunderhawks roar overhead, opening like executioners' jaws to release warriors mid-flight. They land too hard, move too fast. Their formation isn't parade ground precision. It's a pack of starving animals with ceramite fangs, and every one of them knows the smell of fresh kill. This is the butcher's path, not a codified battle plan, not a sanctioned tactic. A term whispered by those who survive. It is the sum of every campaign that ends not with flags or victories, but with something missing: civilians, prisoners, fellow Imperial Guard. Cities reduced to mulch. Allies silenced. Questions buried under commendations and red wax. From the Scouring to the current Indomitus era, the Flesh-Tearers have carved their legend in arterial arcs. Some chapters claim glory, others honor. The Flesh-Tearers leave behind silence, not reverent, not respectful, shocked, hushed, as if what happened shouldn't be spoken of too loudly. There are reasons for this. Partly, it is their tactics. The Flesh-Tearers do not hold lines. They don't fortify. They don't wait. They rip. The preferred doctrine, if it can be called that, is immediate, overwhelming, and sustained assault. Assault squads are favoured over devastators, chainswords over plasma. Dreadnoughts are deployed like siege beasts, sometimes alone, stalking shattered streets to mop up survivors. The Flesh-Tearers don't surround an enemy, they puncture them. Cut straight through their heart, and let the rest wither in confusion and terror. They do not retreat. There is no fallback position. There is no contingency. When the Flesh-Tearers commit, they commit to obliteration. And if it costs them half the force to do it, so be it. If 100 Flesh-Tearers die to crush 1,000 enemies, that is a price they consider fair. The problem is, that equation rarely includes allies. Accounts exist, many unverified, most sealed, of Astra Militarum regiments who fought alongside the Flesh-Tearers and never came back. One infamous incident on Gathalamor involved the 55th Hecaton shock troops, who were last seen holding a cathedral perimeter during a chaos incursion. Vox records caught screams, then silence. When reinforcements arrived, the heretics were gone. So were the guardsmen. The cathedral was coated in blood, and the only remaining Imperial force was a depleted Flesh-Tearers strike squad, silent, calm, and already prepping for extraction. No charges were filed. Another engagement on Draxios III saw the Flesh-Tearers land behind friendly lines during a siege. When questioned by a commissar, they allegedly declared the front line compromised and began cleansing operations through Imperial trenches. The siege ended that day. So did most of the planet's population. Again, no formal reprimand. The Inquisition has, on occasion, taken interest. Notably, a team from the Ordo Hereticus embedded an interrogator within a joint force operation during the Crusade of Iron and Flame. The interrogator's last transmission was a garbled pick capture of Flesh-Tearers breaching a traitor bastion. The feed cuts just as one of them turns toward the lens, blood steam rising from his armor. The file ends with the words, "They know I'm here." He was never seen again. Yet for all the horror, all the whispers, the truth remains. The Flesh-Tearers win. When High Fleet Kraken breached the Segmentum Tempestus, it was the Flesh-Tearers who shattered the synapse chain on Valeria's spine. When the Night Lords launched a genocide campaign through the Piraeus Gulf, it was the Flesh-Tearers who hunted them ship to ship, boarding each one until nothing remained but meat and echo. When plague cults spread through Hadrexus Prime and no one else could breach the quarantine zone, the Flesh-Tearers burned it all. Cultists, civilians, administrators, and a whole Order Hospitaller enclave. Clean. It is hard to argue with results, and in the age of the Dark Imperium, results are all that matter. The Butcher's Path is not a doctrine because it cannot be taught. It is a condition, an infection of method, a philosophy disguised as instinct. The Flesh-Tearers do not simply fight a war, they drown in it, and the deeper they go, the less human they become. Some say this is a rejection of the Codex Astartes. That's only half true. In structure, the Flesh-Tearers obey the Codex. They maintain companies, chaplains, librarians, an apothecarian, a fortress monastery. They keep ranks. They record deployments. But the soul of their chapter, the way they fight, is utterly divorced from Guilliman's vision. Where he saw order, they see opportunity. Where he cautioned restraint, they see risk unclaimed. And this defiance is not out of rebellion, it is necessity. The flesh-tearers know their time is short, that the floor eats at them faster than bureaucracy can measure, that no purity test will ever be passed, that no inquisitorial review will end in applause. So they fight like doomed things, like wolves already bleeding. They go harder, earlier, and faster than anyone expects, because they have to, because they don't know how many tomorrows are left. They are infamous for their use of shock trauma tactics. This includes synchronized orbital bombardment with drop pod insertion, vox jamming enemy command during the breach, and immediate decapitation strikes on enemy leaders within the first hour. There's no patience, no psychological warfare, only kinetic, overwhelming brutality. Their presence alone is destabilizing. Even among other Astartes, they are uncomfortable to fight beside. Salamanders have been known to withhold cooperative deployments. Ultramarines avoid joint campaigns unless directed. The Adepta Sororitas refuse to share forward operating bases. The only forces who seem genuinely at ease among the flesh-tearers are the Death Watch, and even then, only in kill teams where Gabriel Seth's operatives have influence. There's a theory among certain rogue traders and rogue scholars that the flesh-tearers deliberately isolate themselves not for security, but mercy. That they know what they are. That every war they win alone is one less chance to corrupt or contaminate others. That every silence they leave behind is better than explanation, because the explanations are always worse. But perhaps the most disturbing facet of the Butcher's Path is how the flesh-tearers themselves internalize it. They do not speak of victories, they do not name campaigns. There are no heroic murals in their fortress monastery, no battle honors displayed in triumph. Instead, there are relics, shards of armor from those lost to the Black Rage. Skulls of former commanders displayed not as veneration, but reminders. Inscriptions read, not glory or honor, but warnings. This is what we are becoming. They train harder than almost any chapter. They fight more often. Their attrition rate is staggering. They treat their apothecaries with near-divine respect, not because of healing, but because of containment. Some initiates are said to undergo full organ shutdown drills, testing how long they can operate in full combat with no heart rate. It is said that this is not a challenge, but a ritual of proof that they are still in control. When they are not at war, they spar. When they are not sparring, they fast. When they are not fasting, they pray, and not to be saved. They pray not to be the next to fall. There is one story, largely dismissed as apocryphal, of a flesh-tearer who fell to the Black Rage during a sermon. He ripped out his own secondary heart, handed it to the chaplain, and knelt down. His last words were recorded as, "I saw the angel die again. End me." The chaplain complied, and then burned the pulpit. This is the atmosphere in which the Butcher's Path is not just followed, but normalized. A chapter that knows its name is a warning, that chooses to be the blade when everyone else is the shield, that welcomes missions no one else will take, not for valor, but because no one else is allowed. So what do you do with warriors like that? You use them. You point them at the worst things the galaxy has to offer, the hive fleets, the traitor crusades, the Necron tomb worlds breaking containment. You let them bleed in silence, win the war, and vanish before the administratum arrives. And if the cost is one more planet scorched, one more Vox archivist silenced, one more PDF command wiped in a communications mishap, well, that's the price of survival in the Imperium of man. Cretacia is not a world. It is a wound. Orbiting a dying star in the eastern fringe, far from the cradle of Terra's light, Cretacia does not support life. It challenges it. The very atmosphere bites. The gravity drags. And beneath the jungle canopy, things move that should have died millions of years ago. Beasts with armor-plated hides, spined tongues, ultraviolet eyes. They don't stalk. They stampede. They do not hunt with strategy, but with fury. And the only rule they obey is strength. This is where the flesh-tearers call home, not out of preference, out of recognition. When the chapter relocated here in M36, it was already fractured. Its numbers were dwindling, its reputation in ruins. Successor chapters had begun distancing themselves. There were whispers of censure, perhaps even forced disbandment. But Cretacia, raw, unbroken and unclaimed, offered something the flesh-tearers could not find anywhere else. Truth. There is no civilization here, no spires, no manufactorums, no monuments, only red soil, black roots, and the low roar of predators too old for names. It is a world that reflects the chapter's essence, not through honor, but through struggle. Every breath on Cretacia must be earned, every footstep challenged. The decision to settle here was more than strategic. It was symbolic. The flesh-tearers did not want sanctuary. They wanted reflection. If they were beasts, let them live among beasts. If their fate was damnation, let their home be its echo. The fortress monastery is built into a cliff face above a volcanic gorge, fused with the mountain as if grown from it. The only way in is by flight. Its halls are not grand. They are narrow, scarred, functional. Armor plating covers every surface. The air smells of oil and incense and old blood. There are no training arenas, only pits. No audience chambers, only oaths. Initiation begins with the descent. Recruits are taken in thunderhawks to the heart of the jungle and dropped without warning. No guidance, no gear beyond what they carry. From there, they must survive. Not hours, not days, weeks. The trial is not measured by time, it is measured by arrival. If you return, you pass. If not, your bones feed the canopy. The jungle is called the moor by those who have walked it. It is not mapped. It cannot be. Auspec's interference is near total. The underbrush grows back faster than it can be cut, and the beasts do not hunt singly. Some are massive, scaled leviathans that move through the trees like storms. Others are small, venomous swarms that enter through your eyes. But the worst are the packs, creatures that think, not like men, like killers. Those who return from the descent are marked, not just physically, though few emerge without permanent damage, but mentally. They speak more slowly. Their eyes don't blink at sudden movement. Some come back with trophies. Others come back silent. A few come back and immediately ask to return. These are watched closely. Only then does the implantation begin. The gene seed takes poorly here. Rejection rates are high. Deaths during neural adaptation are frequent. Some candidates scream for weeks. Others do not scream at all, and those are worse. The red thirst comes early. The black rage, sometimes before implantation finishes. One aspirant tore out his own biscopia before the apothecaries could sedate him. They burned his remains. Then they burned the chamber. There is no comfort here. No familial bond between battle brothers. The chapter is not a brotherhood, it is a pack. The strong protect the weak only until the weak endanger the mission. Then they are left. The weak do not complain. They know the law. Do not fail. The chaplains are perhaps the only ones who offer something like connection. But even they speak not of unity, but of control. Their sermons are about restraint as defiance. That to restrain the beast is not weakness, but domination. That every second you do not kill is a second you are winning. These words mean more on Cretacia. Because outside the monastery, there are no enemies to practice against. No Xenos, no heretics, only things. Every deployment into the wilds is lethal. Fire teams go missing. Veteran Astartes vanish beneath treefall. Even the dreadnoughts are not safe. Once, a jungle subsidence opened beneath an advancing ironclad and buried it alive. Its sarcophagus was recovered years later, crushed from pressure and half digested by root acid. And yet the chapter thrives here, in its own way. They do not grow in number, but they grow strong. Each survivor of Cretacia is tempered, not by training, but by suffering, by deprivation, by the absolute removal of comfort, morality, and context. And it is this, more than anything, that prepares them for the void. Because the rest of the galaxy is not better than Cretacia, just better disguised. Cretacia teaches the flesh-tearers to see through it, to recognize diplomacy as delay, civility as performance. There are no allies in the moor, only things not killing you yet. That lesson burns deep, It follows them into battle, into negotiations, into briefings where other chapters speak of protocol and decorum, and the flesh-tearers remain silent, watching, waiting, measuring everyone in the room not by rank, but by threat. And sometimes what they see changes things. There have been instances, rare but real, when a flesh-tearer has drawn a weapon not against the enemy, but against an ally, when orders have been countermanded, when a deployment has turned not into an assault, but a purge. And when those moments happen, the justification is always the same. We saw what you are. That, more than anything, is the legacy of Cretacia. It sees, it breaks illusions, it does not lie. And so the flesh-tearers, who live in its shadow, cannot afford lies either. They are not noble, they are not righteous, they are real, and so is their world. If the flesh-tearers are the embodiment of a curse sharpened into a weapon, then Gabriel Seth is the hand that grips the hilt and refuses to let go. He is not their savior, he is their mirror. When Gabriel Seth took command of the flesh-tearers in the closing decades of M41, the chapter was barely a shadow of itself. Their numbers were broken, their names stained, their gene seed corrupted beyond theoretical recovery. Entire sectors barred their approach. Inquisitors spoke openly of quarantine. And within the halls of their own fortress, warriors began to fall before ever seeing battle, killed not by enemy blades but by visions, seizures, and ritualized madness. Seth stepped forward, not as a reformer, but as a force of will. He was not elected, he was recognized. The way one recognizes a storm is coming, not with applause, but with preparation. From the moment he assumed command, Gabriel Seth ruled with immediacy. He cut dead weight, reorganized squads, cleansed the ranks of those too far gone to control. He did not mourn, he did not hesitate. He stripped the chapter down to its essence. No more wasted rituals, no more appeals for redemption, no more pretending they were anything but what they were, butchers in service to a higher cause. And he demanded results. Seth initiated a campaign of near-constant warfare. The chapter became nomadic, rarely returning to Cretacia. Every call for aid was answered. Every unclaimed war zone was seized. Every opportunity to bleed was taken. To fight was to live. To stop was to rot. Critics called it madness. Seth called it survival. In one rare transcript recovered from the personal archives of Inquisitor Lyrax Grendel, Seth was recorded during a strategy conclave stating, "We fight because the moment we rest, we see it. The wings, the betrayal, the end. So we keep fighting. If the galaxy demands monsters, let it have us. But let us choose who dies screaming." His voice carried not like a commander, but like a confession. Gabriel Seth is a man shaped entirely by pressure. There are no records of him before his ascension. His origins are blank, either erased or never recorded. His deeds prior to command are scattered, buried in sealed after-action reports, some marked by cross-references to Ordo Xenos operatives and the Navis Nobilite. One of the few known facts is his presence at the Siege of Melkis, where he reportedly killed 3 Chaos Lords in personal combat while suffering from a punctured primary heart and the early symptoms of the Black Rage. He survived. They didn't. Seth's combat style reflects the chapter he commands, direct, overwhelming, and without apology. He does not favor distance. He is not a tactician in the mold of Guilliman or a spiritual lodestone like Dante. He is a brute, a living storm of teeth and iron. His weapon, Blood Reaver, is a chainsword so massive it borders on absurd, fitted with oversized adamantium teeth and a custom reactive hilt. It is said to have cleaved through a Warlord Titan's cockpit during the siege of Athlan's fall. There were no survivors to confirm, but Seth's leadership is not defined by violence. It is defined by clarity. He does not pretend the flesh-tearers are noble. He does not flatter the High Lords of Terror. He does not kiss the sigils of the Inquisition. He does not drape himself in the robes of tradition. When he speaks, it is as a killer who knows exactly what he is and demands to be used accordingly. There are records of Seth walking out of an Imperial diplomatic summit after being asked to temper his tone. Another account, considered apocryphal but persistent, describes him threatening to execute an entire segment of the administratum for misfiling gene seed transfer protocols. The punchline: they corrected the error. But it is in his dealings with other chapters that Seth's identity becomes fully revealed. The flesh-tearers have long been pariahs among their peers. Seth made that tension official. He has stood face-to-face with Primarch Reboot Guilliman himself, twice, and both times he spoke with unflinching defiance. In one exchange, Guilliman questioned the flesh-tearers' methods. Seth reportedly responded, "You left us to burn in the dark. Now you return and ask why we are fire?" He was not censured, because even Guilliman understands, you do not extinguish a blade already buried in the throat of your enemy. Seth's relationship with the Blood Angels is perhaps the most tragic note in this composition. Lord Commander Dante, ever the stoic father figure of Sanguinius' legacy, has made multiple attempts to reconcile, to bring the flesh-tearers closer into the fold, to find common ground. But Seth rejects it, not with hatred, but with honesty. He believes the Blood Angels are deluding themselves, that their rituals, their mourning, their attempts at grace, are lies, pretty veils over rot, that the flaw cannot be excised, that it must be mastered through action, not denial. In one recorded meeting between Seth and Dante on the eve of the devastation of Baal, Seth is heard saying, "Your sons still weep for wings, mine sharpen claws. Which of us will survive the night?" The answer came in blood. But beyond rhetoric, beyond violence, Seth has done what few believed possible. He has stabilized the flesh-tearers, not cured, not redeemed, but clarified. Under his command, the chapter operates with lethal efficiency. Recruitment protocols have been refined. Deployment cycles are optimized for maximum enemy exposure and minimum civilian contact. Black Rage manifestation rates, while still high, are better monitored. The chaplaincy is stronger than it's been in centuries, and perhaps most impressively, the flesh-tearers now field integrated Primaris squads, modified, adapted, and indoctrinated into the madness rather than used to replace it. Some of these Primaris initiates have shown early signs of the gene flaw. This is celebrated. It means the blood remembers. It means they belong. Seth has even begun a quiet campaign of influence across other successor chapters, reaching out to those similarly burdened by the flaw, the Lamenters, the Angels Sanguine, the Knights of Blood. It is not alliance, it is communion, an understanding that they are all marked, all cursed, all needed. For in the darkness of the 42nd millennium, it is not the perfect that survive, it is the monstrous. And Seth, he is not afraid of the dark. He lives there, he commands it, and he has no intention of letting the Imperium forget what monsters still serve in its name. He knows his chapter may not survive the next century, but he'll make damn sure the galaxy remembers their roar. They came from the void in numbers no mind could measure. A tide of hunger. A swarm so vast it broke the stars behind it. Hive Fleet Leviathan had split, and one of its splinters, the Great Devourer, turned its eyeless gaze toward Baal. And Baal, the blood-soaked cradle of Sanguinius' line, stood alone. The devastation of Baal was not a battle. It was extinction with a countdown. The Blood Angels, proud scions of the Angel, rallied every resource they had. Successor chapters were summoned. Reinforcements requested. They fortified what they could and prayed to the Emperor for the rest. It was a war already lost before the first drop of ichor hit the sands. And then the flesh-tearers came. They didn't arrive with fanfare. There were no declarations, no parades of allegiance, just gunmetal ships descending in silence, their hulls scarred and dripping with the last war's soot. Gabriel Seth did not ask permission. He simply walked into the strategium and took his place beside Dante. No one stopped him. They knew better. For all their fractured past, for all the distrust and tension, the moment had come when nothing else mattered. The Angels' sons would stand together, or be consumed alone. The flesh-tearers were assigned the most volatile fronts, the worst terrain, the sectors already swarming. Seth chose them himself. He wanted no survivors. He wanted no questions. If they were to die, they would die where their fury could be most useful. Baal Secundus fell first. The Tyranid advance swarmed its defences in hours, not days. Biomass absorption began before extraction was complete. The PDF was obliterated. The planetary crust began to dissolve. Seth authorized orbital bombardment while his own forces were still on the ground. He lost half a company in that firestorm. He didn't blink. On Baal itself, the flesh tearers became shock scalpel units, deployed where the front lines had already broken. Their job wasn't to reinforce, it was to rupture, to dig into the swarm like claws into rot, tear open the synaptic core, and let the hive mind feel the pain. It worked. But the cost was biblical. Entire squads vanished into biomass. Brother sergeants detonated their plasma cores when overrun. Apothecaries were lost, trying to retrieve gene seed from comrades who had already dissolved. One drop pod was swallowed mid-descent by a spawning pit. They kept going. The Black Rage came faster than anyone expected. So many flesh tearers fell to it during the siege that the Death Company was repurposed on the fly. Chaplains stopped naming them. There wasn't time. They simply pointed them at the swarm and let go. It became ritual. Deploy, rage, die. Seth himself led multiple breaches into Tyranid command nodes, chitin fortresses surrounded by biocannon and shielded by living walls of Carnifex meat. He fought with Bloodreaver in both hands, armor ruptured, helm cracked, blood indistinguishable from spore. Witnesses claim he killed a tyrant by tearing its jaw off with his bare hands. No picked footage survived. But what remained of the beast was later found impaled on a blackened rebar spike just outside the field hospital. Message received. But even with all that fury, the line broke. The Tyranids kept coming. Day turned to night, turned to crimson fog. Every inch gained cost gallons. Every retreat turned into a last stand. And then, silence. Not victory, not evacuation, just silence. The skies over Baal churned, the stars flickered, and reality bent. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, tore across the galaxy, splitting the Imperium in half and rupturing the warp like a wound. For a moment, Baal was forgotten by both gods and monsters. When time resumed, something had changed. The Tyranid swarm was gone, dead, scattered, killed not by Imperial hands, but by something else. Something worse. Across the ruined plains, the scythes of the Emperor found signs of mass disintegration. Tyranid forms torn apart at the molecular level. Ash stains that hissed in the wind. There are theories. None are safe. The only fact is this: Baal did not fall, and the flesh tearers had survived. Barely. Of the chapter's full complement, fewer than 100 returned to Cretacia. Entire companies were gone. Gene seed stocks vaporized, their fleet crippled, their apothecarian left with more names to mourn than bodies to bury. But they had done it. They had held. And Gabriel Seth, he did not call it victory. He called it time bought. The devastation of Baal was a pivot point, not just for the Blood Angels, but for the flesh tearers as well. In that crucible, they proved something few dared say aloud: that the curse did not make them weak. It made them necessary. Without them, the flanks would have collapsed. Without their fury, the Death Company would have turned inward. Without Seth, the Angels' sons would have burned alone. And yet, what they earned was not glory. It was suspicion. The Inquisition took interest. Again. There were reports of collateral, civilian deaths, strategic deviation, even whispers of gene floor acceleration due to the warp rift. A Magos biologist went missing after examining post-battle gene samples. His data lattice was later recovered, half melted, from a flesh tearer's assault barge. No charges filed, because again, they had won. The introduction of the Primaris Marines shortly after was seen by some as a reward. Others called it a correction. The flesh tearers accepted them, but only barely. The Primaris were stronger, yes, but they lacked memory. They hadn't bled for Baal. They hadn't screamed in the dust while Tyranid spores filled their lungs. Some veterans called them hollow plate. Others taught them the chant of the Maw. Most were silent, but they learned. And over time, something unexpected happened. The Primaris began to change. Those assigned to the flesh tearers, those who survived the rites, the jungle, the rituals, began reporting visions. Not dreams, memories. They felt wings. They felt hunger. They began to rage. The floor had reached them, and the chapter cheered. Not loudly, not in the open, but in blood rites and quiet vox prayers, they gave thanks. Not because the Primaries were failing, but because they were joining. Now, in the aftermath of Baal, the flesh tearers stand at a crossroads no one else can see. To most of the Imperium, they remain pariahs, dangerous, tolerated, used. To the sons of Sanguinius, they are brothers, unstable, uncomfortable, but proven. To themselves, they are what they have always been, red-handed servants of a throne that cannot love them, monsters pointed at monsters, and a name you whisper only when you need everything else to die. And Baal is the proof. The galaxy forgot what the flesh tearers could do. Now it remembers. The galaxy is sick with watchers. Every war zone has eyes. Every proclamation echoes down 1,000 Vox channels. Nothing happens without judgment. And judgment in the Imperium is a weapon, just like bolters or blades, only slower, quieter, and aimed from across a marble desk half a sector away. This is the shadow the flesh tearers walk in. They do not just fight the enemies of mankind, they fight the opinion of mankind, the whispers, the reports, the way a name is pronounced slightly differently when spoken in High Gothic. A pause before flesh tearers. A raised brow. A tightened grip on a data slate. They feel it. They are not a secret, but they are not welcome. To the Adeptus Terra, the flesh tearers are a data anomaly that refuses to resolve. On one line, Chapter 106, active, loyalist, Blood Angels gene stock, combat deployment rating, exceptional. On the next, high gene flaw manifestation, inconsistent codex adherence, numerous civilian casualties, multiple inquisitorial interventions. Then again, multiple confirmed victories, high-value target elimination, strategic sacrifice success rate unmatched. The file scrolls forever, no conclusion. The Inquisition sees it differently. To the Ordo Hereticus, they are a risk. A gene line so corrupted it should have failed centuries ago. A force that hides within the legitimacy of the Adeptus Astartes while operating like sanctioned predators. To the Ordo Xenos, they are a tool, lethal against threats too virulent for diplomacy. To the Ordo Malleus, they are unknown. The psychic signature of the chapter is unstable. Librarians die too young. Warp resonance scans return impossible readings. Some say the Black Rage is not just memory, but something watching back. And yet none of the Ordos have moved to censure. Not officially. Because what the flesh tearers do works. The Imperium doesn't survive on perfection. It survives on pressure. Applied, unending, and brutal. The enemy is infinite. The void never stops screaming. And sometimes you need something just as terrible to answer it. Something you don't put on banners, something you don't introduce to civilians. Just a name, just a signal, just blood. The Astra Militarum calls them Chapter 106 when they file requests. Or the Cretaceans, never the full name. It's safer that way. Once requested, they don't arrive through standard deployment cycles. They come when they want. And if you try to cancel the request, if you realize what's about to land and try to rescind it, the reply is silence. And then they come anyway. The Administratum tracks them obsessively. Entire subdepartments exist just to catalogue the aftermath of their campaigns. Loss ratios, psychological fallout, economic recovery windows. There's a whole sector in the Segmentum Solar whose post-flesh tearers data was so grim it was excised from the Imperial tithe schedule. To this day, that world's population is listed as uncertain pending regrowth. They left no heretics, or citizens, just ruins. Even among other chapters, the tension is constant. Some, like the Minotaurs or the Executioners, respect them. Brutality, recognizing brutality. Others, like the Dark Angels or the Ultramarines, see them as unstable, a deviation, a relic of a time when the Emperor's wrath was raw and unfiltered. But no one challenges them to their face, because there's a difference between disdain and suicide. What makes the flesh-tearers most dangerous in the Imperium's eyes isn't their bloodlust, it's their freedom. They move between the gears, not part of the great machine, but not exiled from it either. They are loyal, but not obedient, used, but not owned. And that terrifies the ones in robes more than any traitor legion. Because the flesh-tearers remember a truth the Imperium tries to forget. The Emperor did not build this galaxy with consensus. He built it with fire, and fire does not apologize. This autonomy has led to incidents. There was the cleansing of Ryvax, where a joint operation between the Ecclesiarchy and the Sisters of Battle was undermined by a sudden flesh-tearers strike that preemptively purged 3 hive spires. There were no surviving cultists. There were also no surviving refugees. The Mission Superior filed a censure request. Gabriel Seth replied with a picked capture of a burning heretic shrine, captioned, "Your timing was poor, ours was perfect." The file was archived, no further action taken. There was the Vox silence over Gerasene Delta, where a PDF command requested flesh-tearers support, then tried to withdraw the call upon learning which chapter had answered. All communications from the command center ceased after arrival. 20 hours later, the war zone was secure. The only remaining Vox log was a looped recording of a flesh-tearers chaplain reciting litanies over an open field. In the distance, burning tanks. No movement. Inquisitors investigating the flesh-tearers often disappear into bureaucracy. Not because they are silenced, but because they are conflicted. For every report of atrocity, there are 3 victories. For every massacre, a counter-massacre that saved a world. The problem isn't guilt, it's cost. And the Imperium runs on cost. Even the High Lords of Terror, removed as they are from battlefields and blood, know the arithmetic. The galaxy burns, and every blade must be used, cracked, cursed, or clean, so long as it kills. That is the only measure left, so the flesh-tearers are not erased, they are managed, kept on the fringes, given wars no one else wants, deployed to sectors where total cleanse is not a failure, but a requirement. Their name is filtered in official communiques, their heraldry blurred in recruitment picts. They exist like a wound that won't close, but keeps the infection at bay. And all the while they watch back. Because the flesh-tearers are not stupid. They see the audits, they hear the pauses in transmission, they feel the judgment, and they know what happens when the Imperium decides a chapter is more threat than tool. They've seen what happened to the Flame Falcons, to the Steel Cobras, to the Carcharodons before their return. They are not waiting to be erased. They are waiting to be needed so badly, no one dares touch them. This is their place in the Imperium now. Not heroes, not traitors, but shadows cast by the burning sun of a dying empire. Bleeding to hold the line no one else will admit is broken. Hope is not a doctrine in the Imperium of man. It's a heresy whispered by those who still believe the galaxy can be something other than a funeral procession with banners. And yet, in the deepest vaults of the Blood Angels Librarius, among the sealed memory coils of 1,000 battle brothers too broken to speak, there exists a question, a hope. Can the flesh-tearers be saved? And beneath it, scrawled not by a scribe, but by a chaplain who had walked among them during the devastation of Baal. Should they be? The future of the flesh-tearers is not prophecy, it's pressure. A relentless, slow-crushing certainty that what they are cannot last, that entropy will win, that every victory is one more crack in the blade. But still, they fight. Because the truth is this, the flesh-tearers exist in a moment, not a timeline, not a legacy, a moment, sharpened and drawn and blood-wet, extended by force of will and the refusal to be finished. But the moment is changing. The rise of the Primaris Marines was the first shift. Call's creations were supposed to be the Imperium's answer to 10,000 years of decline, clean, efficient, post-flawed. but they were sterile, untested, and more importantly, alien. For chapters like the Ultramarines, the transition was almost seamless. For the Flesh-Tearers, it was a war of identity. Some Primaris initiates rejected the rituals, fought the indoctrination. Some died in training exercises that were never called tests, but always were. Others broke before ever reaching battle, unable to reconcile what they were engineered to be with what the chapter needed them to become. But a few, just a few, changed. They began dreaming. Not hallucinations, not programming glitches. Dreams. Of fire, of betrayal, of wings torn in silence. The floor had reached them. Despite everything Carl promised, despite the Vault-sterilized gene coding and the purification protocols, something in the blood remembered. And that memory bled forward. Not like a virus, like a calling. Those who responded were accepted. The rest were removed. Not always violently. Sometimes just reassigned. Other times quietly transitioned to fleet support or placed in command of reserve squads. Still wearing red and black, still serving the Emperor, but never again on the front line. Not where it mattered. This selection wasn't ordered. It wasn't policy. It was cultural. A decision made in every glance, every silence in the sparring cages, every oath spoken by someone who had seen the Black Rage and didn't blink. These Primaris are different now. Not fully Flesh-Tearers, not fully new. They are something in between. A hybrid doctrine, taller, stronger, but dreaming. And the chapter is watching them closely, because if they survive, then so might the chapter. The second shift is less obvious, but deeper. It is philosophical. Gabriel Seth, for all his brutality, has begun speaking differently. His recent communiques, those intercepted or leaked, show a subtle change in tone. Less fire, more steel, less rage, more intention. He speaks of war as a gift, not to the enemy, to the chapter. That every battle is a reminder of why they exist. That every deployment, every butchered campaign is proof that the Imperium still needs monsters. That so long as there is a war zone no one else will touch, the Flesh-Tearers are invited. And if they are invited, they are justified. It's a dangerous idea, because it means the curse is no longer a curse. It's a mission. The red thirst isn't shame, it's hunger with purpose. The black rage isn't madness, it's memory with permission. There are voices within the chaplaincy, new ones, younger ones, who echo this. Who teach that the flaw is not to be feared, but understood. That Sanguinius did not die to curse his sons, but to arm them. That the visions are not psychotic echoes, but relics of something deeper, something divine. A few librarians whisper of psychic resonance patterns, shared dreamscapes among Death Company aspirants, of identical phrases spoken by battle brothers who have never met, of symbols scratched into their sarcophagi that match pre-heresy blood angel rites long thought lost. It could be coincidence, it could be heresy, it could be proof. Whatever it is, it's being watched. And then there is the third shift. External, strategic, imperial. The Imperium is changing, slowly, violently, against its own inertia. With Guilliman returned, with the Great Rift open and half the galaxy choking in the dark, the High Lords are desperate. The Ordos are divided, the Ecclesiarchy is fractured, the Mechanicus is hunting truths even the Omnissiah didn't sanction. In this chaos, the tools once feared become useful again. And the Flesh-Tearers are very, very useful. Sectors that once barred their entry now beg for their intervention. Campaigns that would have been handed to the Cadian Remnant or the Death Watch are now routed through Cretacia. Not officially, never on paper. But the orders come, and the Flesh-Tearers answer. This means resources, gene seed transfers, access to rare weapon stockpiles, whispered alliances with lesser-known chapters who understand what it means to be tolerated but not trusted. A black chain forming across the void, chapter to chapter, not united, not loyal to each other, but aware. There is no council, no rebellion, no agenda, just understanding. That the Imperium's edges are being held not by heroes, but by wolves, and wolves remember. This doesn't mean survival is guaranteed. The flaw is still there. The rage still burns. Every generation frays faster than the last. Apothecaries report increased cellular instability. New rituals have emerged: binding, bloodletting, quiet recitations in the dark. But where once these were signs of failure, now they are culture. No one weeps anymore. No one hopes for a cure. They fight, and in that fight, they build something older than redemption. Purpose, not for glory, not for remembrance, but because the stars are dying, the gods are dead, and someone has to bleed the silence. There is a moment, right before impact, when the world holds its breath. The drop pod's retros scream, the plating glows. Vox chant static rattles inside the helmet. And then, silence. Gravity clenches. Time contracts. And the only sound is the heartbeat of a warrior who knows the next breath might be his last. For the flesh-tearers, that moment is home. It is not war that defines them, not battle, not even rage. It's that split second before the storm, when the body is coiled, the blade is drawn, and the choice is already made. To kill, to die, to become the thing the Imperium needs when ceremony fails and prayer runs dry. There are no victory parades for them, no statues, no sainted relics, only records, redacted, misfiled, whispered about by survivors who flinch at red armor in the dark. Only scars, left on worlds that no longer remember who freed them. Only blood, coating both the enemy and the hands that held the line. And yet they remain loyal. Not because they are loved, not because they are safe, because they have nothing else. The galaxy they serve was never built for them. It fears them, cages them, pretends they are an accident of genetics instead of a symptom of a dying age. But the flesh-tearers understand the truth. The Imperium does not endure because it is just. It endures because someone kills the thing that justice cannot reach. Someone without hesitation. Someone without hope. Someone who will die without a name so that others can whisper theirs in comfort. They are the cost. They have always been the cost. And in that burden, there is clarity. The black rage still takes them, the red thirst still burns, the flaw still coils beneath every oath, and still they rise. Still, they answer the call. Still, they walk where even the Death Watch fears to tread. Still, they fight. Not for redemption, not for salvation, but so that when the last walls break, the last gates fall, and the last light flickers in the distance, something will still be standing, even if it's bleeding, even if it's alone, even if it's monstrous. The flesh-tearers are not the future of the Imperium, they are its reminder. That wrath can be holy, that horror can be harnessed. That even the worst of us, if pointed true, can still carve silence into meaning. So when the next war comes, when the void darkens and the ground shakes and the Vox traffic breaks into screams, listen closely. You'll know them by the roar of engines too close to the surface, by the chains wards that never stop, by the name whispered like a warning. Flesh-tearers.